Thank you, Acting Speaker. I rise to speak on this anti-vilification bill before the Assembly today. This bill extends anti-vilification laws beyond ethnicity and religion to also cover disability, sex characteristics, sexual orientation, gender identity and personal association with a protected person. It also includes tougher criminal penalties and introduces new serious vilification offences for inciting hate or making threats based on protected attributes, with penalties of up to 5 years imprisonment. It also does quite a number of other things which a number of other speakers have already talked about, so I won't repeat them once again. But last sitting week I note that the government also, as part of this bill, introduced the political defence for incitement, genuine political purpose, which I note that the Leader of the House has now put forward an amendment on this issue. After much pressure, of course, this government has finally started to listen to Jewish community groups, other faith community groups and the opposition by removing this problematic provision. However, they should have listened in the very first place. As I know, and as we know, and I know in particular as the Whip, having received the email, that the government originally planned to both debate and vote on this bill last sitting week, but then changed it to debate only. Purportedly at the time to give members more of a say, but as the Leader of the House has just confirmed just now, it is not just about giving members more of a say. It was also because of concerns raised by the Jewish community groups and many others. So they have admitted that the fact that there were these concerns that were not listened to in the first place. So they should have actually waited until they were ready to actually debate the bill before introducing it when they weren't ready. Now, I do note as well, Acting Speaker, that the bill also explicitly includes the terms preaching and proselytising in the government's definition of religious purpose. Indeed, legitimate religious activities such as preaching, teaching and advocating spiritual beliefs should never be lumped in with hateful conduct. But the bill still uses a subjective standard in its harm-based provisions, which I'll go to more later. There are a number of key concerns regarding this bill. Firstly, there is the overreach and potential threat to freedom of speech and freedom of religion. This bill risks stifling legitimate political expression, like protests against state actors and political ideologies. Also as well, the definition of race in the bill, albeit it's my view that we should actually move on from using this term, includes nationality or national origin, which could mean criticism of foreign governments is misinterpreted as vilification. Also, broad and vague references to social cohesion could allow laws to be weaponised to silence dissent and protest. A second key concern relates to the expansion of criminal offences. 5 years of imprisonment is disproportionate in many cases for expression-based offences. The definition of incite is way too broad, capturing even subtle speech and creates a lot of uncertainty in legal application. And the threshold for criminal vilification is lowered to recklessness instead of intent, making it way too easy to prosecute for speech-based offences. A third key concern relates to religious implications. The harm-based provision is subjective, allowing individuals to define what is harmful, making it easy or easier to silence religious or moral views simply because someone feels offended. This is the biggest red flag with this bill, allowing courts or indeed complainants to drill down to narrower subgroups within a faith or community to determine harm, creating enormous legal uncertainty. And one example is, say, distinctions between Sunni and Shia Muslims, or indeed between and within other religious groups, such as within Christianity. This is a highly subjective approach, which is confusing and still is unpredictable. Protections and outcomes might differ even within the same faith or community if sensitivities vary between different subgroups. Also, I note, Acting Speaker, the expanded definition of public means the law could apply to sermons, religious teachings, masses and social media posts, even if shared in private settings. And religious teachings and moral views could still be targeted if somebody simply feels that they are harmful, even if it aligns with centuries-old faith traditions and doctrines. Basically, the government will or may have unprecedented authority over what religious groups can say, and indeed what other groups in our community can say as well. Now, I do note that these amendments that have been moved today by the Leader of the House do address some of these concerns, but as noted, the bill still uses a subjective standard in its harm-based provision, which, in my view, and the view of many colleagues and many in the community, will impact upon freedom of speech and freedom of religion. Now, I want to just give some quotes from some of my constituents that I've been listening to about this issue in the electorate of Mornington. Matt from Mornington says, and I quote, "I fear that this bill could further divide our community if it is weaponised against political opponents. I urge you to reconsider this legislation and ensure that the rights of Christians and other religious groups are fully protected." In addition, Keith from Mount Martha says, and I quote, "I am genuinely worried that the law would divide the community." Kate from Mornington says, and I quote, "As a Christian, I'm worried that the low vilification threshold and subjective elements in the law could put Christians at risk of litigation." Robert from Mornington says, "I call for the abandonment of this bill as I believe it poses a threat to the religious freedom of Christians in Victoria." And Jody from Mount Martha says, "I urge you to abandon the bill to protect the rights and freedoms of Christians in our society." And I've also heard from many others from both faith and non-faith groups, from Christians through to Muslims and many others, about the concerns about this bill, particularly about the subjective elements of this bill. Overall, as noted by my colleagues, the Coalition will be opposing this bill because we believe that the subjective test for harm still raises substantial concerns. And as the member for Evelyn noted earlier, we had asked for consideration in detail on this bill, which was denied by the government, which actually would have given us further opportunity to look at some of these elements of the bill in more detail. With the excessive subjectivity, vague thresholds and potential for overreach, we cannot in good conscience support it. Of course, we don't want people vilifying others, but this bill goes too far and will stifle or potentially stifle freedoms, including the freedom of speech and freedom of religion. In my maiden speech to this House, I said, "I will stand up for people of faith or non-faith to freely speak their mind," end quote. I also note a famous quote from Sir Robert Menzies, the founder of the Liberal Party, who said, and I quote, "Stagnant waters are level and in them the scum rises. Active waters are never level, they purify themselves in a few hundred yards." When we allow for a diversity of ideas and opinions and views in our community, we allow for the best outcomes, and we also allow for those views to be criticised publicly as well. When you suppress things, you actually sometimes create more problems in society in the long run. I note that our reasoned amendment still remains in place with respect to this bill as well, and I will read that again, that all the words after that be omitted and replaced with the words that this House refuses to read this bill a second time until the Allen Labor government A, urgently considers additional options, including those available to Victoria Police as a practical means of tackling antisocial and vilifying behaviours, and B, consults further with Victoria's faith groups, including the Jewish and Islamic communities, who have warned the government that the proposed genuine political purpose defence to incitement will damage social cohesion in this state. So, Acting Speaker, to conclude, I ask that the government further consider and further consult with respect to this bill. I ask that the government reconsider what they have done with respect to denying consideration in detail. I ask that this, before it goes through, of course it will go through the lower house with the numbers that the government has in this place, but I ask that before this goes through in the upper house, that they further consider amendments to this bill and perhaps actually consider withdrawing it altogether, particularly given that I do not think sufficient consultation has taken place, and given the subjective harm may well actually harm people of faith, harm freedom of religion, harm freedom of speech. We need to be a Victoria a Victoria that actually looks after people of faith, that encourages freedom of expression, and that is something that we always stand up for in the Liberal Party and within the Coalition.